I hadn't planned on stopping for the night. The route was supposed to be a straight shot, 5 hours tops. But around midnight, somewhere on a deserted highway in Nevada, I realized I hadn't seen another car for hours. Just miles and miles of empty desert and a single flickering radio station fading in and out. The gas gauge was dipping into the red, and with no sign of a town on the horizon, I was starting to worry. Then a sign appeared out of the darkness. Last stop motel, 5 miles ahead. I could almost hear my tired brain begging me to pull over, to crash on a real bed, instead of risking falling asleep behind the wheel. The GPS didn't pick it up, but in my exhausted state, I figured it was a small off-the-map place. Just 5 miles. I could make that. As I turned off onto a narrow, cracked road, the silence was overwhelming. No streetlights, not even a house or a passing car. Just the gravel crunching under my tires and the distant howl of wind. When the motel finally appeared, it looked like something out of a horror movie. A squat single-story building with a half-lit neon sign that read, AST Stop M__EL. 1 or 2 cars were parked outside, but the place seemed deserted. I parked and stepped out, immediately feeling the cold night air bite into me. The reception was a small room behind a plexiglass window, lit by a single buzzing light. A middle-aged man sat behind the desk, staring at an ancient television. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "Just need a room for the night," I said, handing over some cash. He didn't say anything, just handed me a key with the number 6 inches scratched onto a brass tag. When I turned to head down the hall, I could feel his eyes watching me. I brushed it off. Probably just another weird old guy running a roadside motel in the middle of nowhere. Room 6 was small and smelled faintly of mildew. The bed was stiff, and there was no clock, no phone, just a yellowed Bible on the nightstand and a faded painting of some desert scene on the wall. I locked the door, pulled the curtains closed, and collapsed onto the bed, too tired to care. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. My phone had slipped to the floor, the screen lighting up with a missed call from an unknown number. I brushed it off and turned over when I heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from the wall behind the bed. It was subtle at first, like something dragging across the wood. I listened, holding my breath, as the sound grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't like rats or mice. This was deliberate, rhythmic, like someone tracing a pattern, tapping lightly, in a steady, deliberate way. I lay frozen, unsure whether to get up or stay silent, when my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Reluctantly, I reached for it, and as I glanced at the screen, the words flashed across it. "Do not turn around." I almost dropped the phone. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure whatever was on the other side of the wall could hear it. The scratching stopped, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Seconds ticked by, each one stretching longer, until another message lit up my phone. "Get out." I didn't think twice. Grabbing my keys, I bolted from the bed, swung the door open, and sprinted down the hall toward my car. The lobby was empty, and as I passed, I noticed the TV was off, the receptionist nowhere in sight. But as I reached my car, something caught my eye. A figure standing in the shadow by the motel sign, too far to make out clearly, but watching me. I jumped into the driver's seat, fumbled with the keys, and peeled out of the parking lot, my heart racing. The road stretched out before me, pitch black except for my headlights illuminating the cracked pavement. I kept glancing at my rearview mirror, expecting to see headlights or that shadowy figure. But there was nothing. Just when I thought I was in the clear, a final text popped up on my phone. I almost didn't look, afraid of what I'd see, but curiosity got the better of me. The text on my phone read, "Look again." Against every ounce of self-preservation, I glanced in the rearview mirror, dread coiling in my stomach. The road behind me was empty, black as ink, until the faintest movement caught my eye. Far off in the distance, something was there, just within the reach of my taillights. It was following me. As I sped up, it seemed to keep pace, growing closer, its shape shifting in the darkness. Every hair on my body stood up as I saw what it was. A figure, hunched and distorted, skittering on all fours, crawling at a speed that was completely inhuman. My foot slammed down on the gas pedal, but even as I hit 80, then 90 miles per hour, the thing didn't stop. If anything, it was gaining on me. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely keep the wheel steady, and my mind was racing. Who or what is that? I dared another glance. The thing was now close enough that I could see its face. A pale, grinning mask stretched over hollow eyes. Its skin looked torn and shredded, exposing patches of muscle and bone, and its mouth. It was locked in a wide, unnatural grin, teeth bared in a nightmarish smile that was far too wide, stretching from ear to ear. Suddenly, my car jerked, the engine sputtering as if it had stalled. No, not now. I slammed my fist against the dashboard, pleading with the car to keep moving, but the engine cut out, and the car slowed to a crawl. The thing behind me didn't slow down. It was nearly at my bumper now, still grinning that impossible grin, its eyes locked onto me. In pure panic, I scrambled for my phone, my fingers fumbling as I tried to call for help. Any help. The screen flickered, and then it went black. Dead. Desperately, I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment, intending to use it as some last-ditch weapon. I had no idea what I'd do, but I wasn't going to just sit there. And then, silence. The creature stopped moving, just a few feet from my car, its head tilted in that unnerving way, like it was studying me, waiting. It stayed there, motionless, that awful grin never fading. My pulse thundered in my ears, and I held my breath, hoping, praying it would just leave. Without warning, it lunged at the passenger door, slamming into it so hard, the whole car rocked. I screamed, instinctively throwing myself across the seat as the glass cracked and splintered. The thing scratched at the window, its long, bony fingers clawing against the glass. I watched in terror as its face pressed up against the window, so close I could see every detail of that horrific smile, those empty, hungry eyes. I don't know how I found the courage, but I grabbed the flashlight, swung open the driver's side door, and bolted into the desert, leaving everything behind. I ran, feeling the harsh gravel and sharp stones tearing into my feet, hearing that thing behind me, its unnatural footsteps echoing through the night as it gave chase. I had no idea how long I ran, but eventually my legs gave out, and I stumbled to my knees, gasping for breath. The desert was pitch black around me, and I could feel the thing closing in, that awful, sickening presence bearing down on me. Then headlights appeared in the distance, a truck rumbling down the highway. With the last of my strength, I jumped up, waving my arms and screaming, hoping the driver would see me. The truck screeched to a halt, and I stumbled to the passenger door, practically throwing myself inside. Please, just drive," I choked out, barely able to get the words out through my heaving breaths. The driver, an older man with a kind but concerned face, nodded, clearly spooked but too polite to ask questions. He hit the gas, and I collapsed into the seat, trying to calm my racing heart. After a few minutes of silence, the driver finally spoke. "You know, I don't usually take this road at night," he said quietly, his voice tense. "Too many stories about things out here. Seen some myself, too. People Folks say they see something strange out here in the dark, a thing that don't belong. They call it the grinner. I shuddered, feeling a chill run down my spine. The grinner? I echoed, barely above a whisper. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the road. Yeah, been hearing stories for years. Thing'll chase you down, get right up close, with a smile so wide it'd give you nightmares for life. Ain't nobody seen it and come back the same. Some say it's a ghost, others a demon. Either way, you don't want to look it in the eye. I sank back into the seat, feeling a cold sweat trickle down my neck. I was alive, but I wasn't sure I'd ever be the same. And that's when I realized the grinner was still out there, lurking in the dark, waiting for its next victim to wander down that lonely, forgotten highway. I didn't want to remember that night. I really didn't. But you don't get a choice with memories like these. It was supposed to be just another road trip. I'd been doing them for years, ever since my college days, where the endless stretches of road made the perfect backdrop for blasting rock music, late-night stops at gas stations, and just watching the landscape shift from city grids to empty haunted forests. But this time was different. I'd hit the road alone this time. It was late October, and a storm was supposed to roll in that night. Rain, lightning, wind, all of it. The perfect setting for what would be a forgettable night drive back to my apartment. I'd just visited an old friend a few hours out, one I hadn't seen since our college days. We'd spent most of the evening catching up over drinks, reminiscing about old times. Nothing special, just the usual. But then, as I stepped out into the parking lot, there was this feeling, like something heavy pressing on my chest, like I shouldn't leave. It was around midnight when I finally hit the road, phone GPS ready, coffee in the cup holder, and a few hours of dark highway stretching ahead. The road was empty, save for the occasional flicker of headlights in the rearview mirror that always seemed to vanish as quickly as they'd appeared. I'd been driving for maybe an hour, lost in the rhythm of rain drumming on the windshield, when I noticed it. A small light in the distance, just a tiny, pulsing light up ahead. I assumed it was a broken-down car or someone needing help, so I slowed down. But as I got closer, it didn't look like a car. It wasn't that bright or constant. It was more like a faint glow, pulsing. I slowed down even more, peering through the sheets of rain, squinting against the beams of my own headlights, trying to see what was ahead. But as soon as I got close enough to make out the shape, the glow blinked off, vanished, like it had never been there. With a shiver crawling up my spine, I shrugged it off. Maybe it was a reflection or a trick of the light, right? But then, as soon as I hit the gas to keep driving, something happened that made me freeze. There it was again. The light. And this time, it was in my rearview mirror. My pulse shot up, hammering loud enough to drown out the rain. I stared into the rearview mirror, heart racing, watching that faint pulsing glow hover behind me, keeping pace. The logical part of my brain insisted it had to be headlights from another car, a trick of the storm maybe. But it felt wrong. The light was off, eerie, and it didn't flicker or waver like headlights do in the rain. It just pulsed. And then, like before, it vanished. The highway stretched out ahead, empty and slick with rain, yet my gut screamed at me to keep driving, not to pull over. My hands clenched the wheel as I forced myself to focus forward, but after a few minutes, the light reappeared. Closer now. It was so close I could almost feel the heat of it through the back window. Suddenly, my phone's GPS froze. The map, once alive with blue directions, went dark, leaving me stranded on the road with no signal and no sense of where I was. A creeping sense of dread flooded me as the light blinked out and then reappeared, now right beside the car, keeping speed like it was watching me. I tried to speed up, but it stayed in perfect sync. Faster, slower, no matter what I did, that light floated right alongside like it was mocking me, taunting me. Then in a flash, it darted in front of the car. I slammed on the brakes, skidding on the wet pavement, tires screaming as the car spun wildly. The headlights swept across a flash of dense forest on either side of the road, and for a split second, I swear I saw something standing there. A dark figure just beyond the tree line, staring right at me, motionless in the rain. When the car finally stopped spinning, I was sitting in the middle of the road, my hands shaking, heart pounding, headlights cutting into the darkness. I took a breath, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The glow had vanished again, but something told me it was still there, watching. Desperate to put distance between me and whatever I'd seen, I pressed the gas and peeled out, driving as fast as the slick road allowed. I kept my eyes locked straight ahead, refusing to look back, convinced that if I did, that light would be there. Miles passed, but I couldn't shake the feeling. And then, just as I began to think I'd escaped it, the radio crackled to life. A low, garbled static at first, but then words formed in a distorted whisper, as if from another time, another place. Don't look back. Every hair on my body stood on end. I fumbled for the radio, but no matter how hard I twisted the dial, the voice stayed hollow and sinister, repeating the same phrase over and over. Don't look back. I floored the gas, heart pounding, the road blurring in the rain. My mind spun, trying to make sense of it, trying to escape whatever had latched onto me on this God-forsaken stretch of road. Finally, I saw it. A dim, flickering neon sign up ahead. Motel. It looked run down, forgotten, but at this point, it was salvation. I skidded into the parking lot, threw the car into park, and bolted inside without a second glance. The night clerk barely looked up as I mumbled for a room, slapping cash onto the counter. I stumbled to the room, slammed the door behind me, and locked it tight. But even as I leaned against that door, breathing heavy, I could feel it. A presence just outside, watching, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. But as dawn finally broke, I dared to open the door, squinting into the first light of morning. Nothing. No sign of the light. No strange figure. Just the empty road stretching back into the misty distance. I'd survived the night, but the memory still haunts me. Sometimes when I'm driving alone and night falls, I'll catch a faint glow in the rearview mirror, and every time I keep my eyes forward, grip the wheel tight, and pray that I never see it again. The moment the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of crimson and violet, I knew this wasn't just going to be a typical road trip. It started with the idea of getting away, of driving aimlessly through the back roads for some time to clear my head. But there's a darkness on these winding roads that no amount of sunlight can truly banish. The first strange thing happened maybe an hour into the drive. I was deep into the mountain passes, where the roads are thin, the forests are thick, and there's nothing for miles but empty cabins and overgrown trails. My radio started to stutter, cutting out my usual static-filled rock station with bursts of white noise that hurt my ears. But in between the static, I swear I could hear voices, whispering, urgent, like they were calling out to me. I twisted the dial, hoping to tune it out, but the static only grew louder, overtaking my car's cabin. I almost stopped the car, but thought better of it. Keep driving, I told myself. It's just interference. I should have turned back then. Another hour passed, and I was on a stretch of road that didn't seem to have any end in sight. No sign of civilization, no gas stations, no lights. I'd gone through more forested roads, and the night had fully set in, blanketing everything in inky darkness. Then, out of nowhere, my headlights caught something moving on the side of the road. A person, or at least the shape of one, standing eerily still. They were close enough to see the outline, but not close enough to make out a face. Just a vague, looming figure. I felt my pulse spike as I gripped the wheel tighter, fighting the urge to stare as I drove past. But the further I went, the more I saw them. At least a dozen figures, each one standing in the same position, each with their heads tilted slightly, as if watching me. Every time I passed, I felt their eyes, or whatever they had for eyes, following me, boring into the back of my skull. They weren't hitchhikers, weren't waiting for anyone, just standing there. It felt like some macabre game where if I stopped, if I dared to look too closely, I'd lose something vital. I forced myself to focus on the road, even though the lights at my back seemed to grow, as if those figures were closing in. It was nearly midnight when my headlights finally lit up something other than the endless stretch of trees and asphalt. A roadside motel loomed in the distance, barely illuminated by a flickering vacancy sign. A surge of relief washed over me. Finally, a place to stop. I pulled into the motel's gravel lot, my tires crunching over loose stones, and parked under the buzzing vacancy sign. It felt like the world had shrunk, collapsing into this single dimly lit spot on the side of a mountain road. The figures I'd seen out on the road were nowhere in sight, but their presence lingered, making the hairs on the back of my neck prickle as I walked to the office door. Inside, the clerk looked barely awake, head propped on one hand as he flipped through a battered magazine. When I asked for a room, he glanced at me with a pair of sunken eyes that seemed too hollow for someone alive. "Room 7, he muttered, sliding an ancient key across the counter without looking up. "End of the hall. Checkouts at dawn." I didn't ask questions, just wanted to get some sleep and get out of there. The hall was dim and stretched on for what felt like forever. Room 7 was the last door, right next to a grimy window that looked out onto the empty road. Once inside, I locked the door and checked it twice for good measure. The room smelled musty, like it hadn't been aired out in years, and the dim light bulb overhead flickered every few seconds. But the exhaustion was setting in, and I collapsed onto the bed without bothering to change. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I drifted off, thinking I'd escaped whatever weirdness had followed me there. But something woke me. I don't know how much time had passed, maybe minutes, maybe hours, but a noise dragged me back from the edge of sleep, a soft scratching sound coming from the window. I lay there, holding my breath, straining to hear through the thick silence. And then I saw it. The figure. The same shadowed shape I'd seen on the road, standing outside my window, just barely visible in the moonlight. It wasn't alone this time. There were 3 of them, all standing perfectly still, heads tilted, to watch me. I scrambled backward on the bed, feeling the cold wall press against my spine as my heart hammered in my chest. Then, just as I was about to scream, the lights flickered out completely. The room plunged into darkness, and I could hear them moving, the shuffling of footsteps just outside the door closer, until the faintest whisper seeped through the wood. "Come out." I gripped the sheets so tightly my knuckles ached, paralyzed by fear. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and then silence. I stayed frozen for what felt like an eternity, barely breathing, listening to the pounding of my heart in my ears. When I finally mustered the courage to move, I crawled to the door and peeked through the peephole, dreading what I might see. The hallway was empty. With a trembling hand, I unlocked the door and slipped out, careful not to make a sound. I crept down the hallway, every step echoing like a gunshot. By the time I reached the lobby, the clerk was gone, replaced by a hollow silence that was more unsettling than any scream. I bolted out to my car, fumbling with the keys, every shadow feeling like it was reaching out to pull me back. The engine roared to life, and I tore out of the lot, gravel spitting behind me. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw them again. The figures, lined up along the road, their heads tilted, their empty eyes locked on me as I sped away. I didn't stop driving until the sun came up and the town's lights flickered in the distance. I pulled over in a gas station parking lot, barely able to keep my hands steady enough to cut the engine. I still don't know what they were, those things on the road, or why they chose me. But sometimes, late at night, when the world goes quiet, I can feel that same chill crawl up my spine. And I wonder if maybe, just maybe, they're still out there, waiting for me to return to that endless, haunted road.